Chill here with Sirius Chalice Moon, and after unabashedly accidentally exposing the how uninvolved I am in extortion cults, um, with Mercury, our Jupiter day, we're continuing to the composite of Jeffrey Epstein and Warren Buffett. Like I said, the reason that this is beyond angering is because Warren Buffett was supposed to be at the level of being an investor and Centaurian that could change the fabric of the global economy. And if he couldn't, then I'm ready to hear arguments like explain yourself why he couldn't and why a person at such a position of power is so unsovereign in the face of exploitation-based economy. Now, here is the thing. This is the composite. Okay, I was so angry that I was literally getting wrong the switch in the composite and the natal charts. So I'm going to do the actual composite right now. Jeffrey Epstein and Warren Buffett, what do they create together as a conjoint, okay, as a merge? If there would be a merge and acquisition, what would that merge be like? And midheaven, 27 degrees Libra, not too far from Spica, which is beyond surprising. Venus in Capricorn. And this gives a very weird, extorted vibe to what was supposed to be fairness in trade, particularly about bonds and big conglomerates, Saturn in Sagittarius, applying to square Pluto. Saturn opposing Uranus. Saturn opposing Uranus creates an unusual structure. Pluto opposing Moon. Okay, it might not be on the degree because the Moon can vary with the no. It's but we have the hour of both Pluto Moon opposition on the degree. That Moon is ruled by Saturn, contributing to the volatility. One could be under psychological. One could be the handler of another. Now here is the thing. I don't know if Epstein is the handler of Buffett or the other way around in the situation. Okay, Pluto Moon can be psychological control. Mercury that rules over Uranus is in Scorpio with Black Moon Lilith. Sextile Neptune, which can denote at an extortion cult to do with bonds and trade. Mars in Taurus, the financial interpretation would be banking. Venus in Capricorn, banking conglomerates, investment conglomerates, bonds, and so on and so forth. Neptune Ketu, okay, they're not too conjunct. Neptune in the sign of trade. The Sun being here the closest to the midheaven, 18 degrees Sun in Scorpio, something incredibly toxic around the way that these two lead in their world. And again, that toxicity can be associated with the psychological control that we see with Pluto and the Moon. Now we have Mars in a T-square with Pluto and the Moon. The opposite of the T would be 8 or 7 degrees Scorpio, which would refer us back to Mars, which refers us back to Venus, and that would be basically some sort of vehicle of transformation around how should I say that? Mars Pluto, Mars Moon, very challenging environment when it comes to the fiscal reality. Okay, Mars square Pluto is one of the most aggressive aspects here. Both could be the victim of one another's assault. to be quite. I wouldn't be surprised if Epstein was assaulted by Buffett in the setting of those cults. Jupiter 12 degree Gemini, again referring us back to this Mercury is ruled by Mars and Venus. So there's an ongoing loop between Mercury, Mars, Venus, Saturn, Jupiter. Chiron Rahu. As a fellow Chiron Rahu, one of the challenging. Okay, I'm a natal of Rahu Chiron, but it's a very challenging. At its best, it would be curating something about. At its best, this could curate extortion cults, by the way, but it's not what it did. Yeah, no. When I'm talking about curating, I'm not talking about the subprime. Okay, and if anybody sees an Epstein in the sky with shiny eyes like a child when I say that. Chiron Rahu in a sign of Pisces, Jupiter in the sign of trade, Mercury in the sign of extortion cults. Now, if you want to know what is the subprime, Saturn would be the interest, Mercury would be the tweaking of the interest. Now, we don't have a connection that is direct because Mercury is in Mars sign, Mars is in Venus sign, Venus is in Saturn sign. Saturn applying to square Pluto, an utter and total collapse. Okay? I repeat that. Structure Saturn in long-term compound interest, okay, of mortgages and stuff, Saturn. By the way, I think this went all the way to the Bolicolis because there is insurance component here, but I'm not going to tackle that now. Mercury is to tweak. Mercury is ruled by Mars, Mars in Venus sign, to tweak something, to tweak rates of, to do with banking. A small component that changes the big picture, the subprime. A fundamental detail. Okay, Jupiter, the small detail that changes the big picture. Okay, Rahu Chiron. This is, by the way, the subprime. Rahu Chiron in Pisces, okay? Jupiter, Rahu Chiron going towards a certain wound. Jupiter, by the way, it's about to be my Rahu maturation. May I'm 42. So it's no wonder. Okay? Jupiter in Gemini is the sign of trade. Jupiter in Gemini is where we try to look at the increasing of or the decreasing of, because Jupiter is expansion, but Mercury is something small. What's the one small detail that, if tweaked, would change the big picture? Jupiter is also ruling over that Saturn structure. And that would be the subprime crisis. Okay, lowering the interests and then repeating the same level of interest, even the same level of interest as before. We have many people that bought houses, took long-term mortgages, they're not fixed, on the account of the lower prime interest. Okay, when we take anything that is credit, whether it's credit card or a loan or anything. Okay, and I actually worked at a credit card company. I'm qualified to say that from the qualification that I had explained in that to clients. Okay, I'm not a consultant, but I had particularly the qualification, particularly around the subprime. And this means that this is the fixed, it's not fixed, okay? It's basically fixed in terms of the market. Because if I'm the credit card company, I tell the client, yes, your interest is prime plus. Okay, when you take a mortgage, they're supposed to tell you your interest is going to be prime plus. Now, what they did is they called people to say, hey, the interest is low, but that meant that the prime was low, which basically meant that everybody was setting everybody up. Now, I'm not blaming the direct tellers or bankers that are at the front line and meet the clients. They usually don't get, okay, I did not participate in satanic rites to be a customer service at the credit card company. But people at higher rank, they already know that that's a setup. That's, by the way, what I didn't agree to do at the credit card company. I didn't agree to set people up to have a loan. I basically did not agree to cooperate with the subprime crisis. Okay, that's. um, like I said, the subprime crisis still went on, but this is where, and I also exposed the medical crisis afterwards, because there was another bubble there. But here is the thing. Basically, that would be the thing that would tweak the subprime, that would the fixed level of interest would be lowered. And I say, how could Buffett do it? I didn't say Buffett. How could Epstein do it? I don't know, but together they did that. Now, what would that do? That would create an entire private equity of the houses, because the bank confiscated the houses, because United States doesn't have a housing first. It has a Second Amendment, but a Second Amendment is not good for laser. It's not good for MK often, and it's not good for ICE. And that would be lower interest. People take a loan, then the interest, even if it just comes back to the normal rate, then their loan is doubled and tripled and quadrupled, which means that their monthly return is not, let's say, $1,000 or $3,000 for a nice condo, or a small bathroom in New York, let's say. But but we're talking family housing here, people that actually needed to buy a house. And this is where basically from, let's say, 3,000, it would be almost 10 or 12,000 in one go. Now, let's say somebody makes, yes, 3,000. That would be 36,000 a year. Let's say somebody makes 70,000 a year, and from 3,000 it jumped to three times that. We understand that at 70,000 a year wasn't covering anymore. And in that case, the house is confiscated by the bank. The fact that the bank can actually do that in itself is a crime against humanity. Talking about residence, I'm not talking about investment properties. Housing first, okay? It's a basic human right. Now, Neptune Uranus trine, okay, unusual fumbling, unusual tweaking of liquid assets, of megalithic wealth to do with trade. Again, that trade with Black Moon Lilith is extortion cults. You want me to show you the Epstein Island here? Island is Neptune, is an isolated city surrounded by water. Okay, Neptune around Al Qaeda, isolated, surrounded by the ocean, engulfed or flooded. Mercury also rules over cities. A city, Mercury in Scorpio with Black Moon Lilith, a city, an island to do with sex. Mars in a fixed land to do with women. Women here could be homeless, could be in debt, could be immigrants, BIPOC, or very young. Saturn in Jupiter sign. Okay, Saturn here can be both age gap, but it, by the way, it could also be elderly women, but I guess that was less the kink. Um, and that was the investment. Now let's take a look at the synastry. Okay, a little bit of romance. Okay. Venus Keto is coming from Warren Buffett, Venus Keto, and Jeffrey Epstein brings Saturn Keto, the purging of limitations, and Neptune Venus. Okay, actually, Jeffrey Epstein, this is why we also talk about him now, because it's associated with the Saturn-Neptune cycle. Okay, the Soviet stuff. Structure, okay, Saturn, bone structure, Neptune, megalithic wealth, drugs. Is it even real? Okay, when you have hard Neptune transits, you ask yourself, is that even real? The dissolution of big structures, okay, that it's given subprime. It's given subprime. And um, Lilith Neptune, again, something mysterious, mafiosi, drug related to juvenile Liliths, okay? So Venus trine Pluto, the transformation of values, agreement on values, Pluto of Epstein is remediating the Ketu Rahu of Buffett. I don't know in what way. I don't know if I want to know, but but that's um, yes. Maybe they're married. Like in these cults, there is marriages to young boys, and maybe Epstein was that young boy. Uranus Jupiter Pluto. They have Buffett's Jupiter Pluto. Nay, Jeffrey Epstein has okay. Uranus in Cancer of Jeffrey Epstein is conjoining the Jupiter Pluto of Buffett. Um, on his descendant. Yeah. There's definitely partners, there's definitely business partners, could be more. They could also be enemies, okay? They could also create a big divorce. and they revolutionize something. There's some big growth that is very sudden, and they can control cows. The squares, Venus, Venus, Ketu, and Rahu square Chiron and Mercury of Epstein, which would be the exposure, the sudden exposure of Jeffrey Epstein when things went wrong. That would be either the treason or, like I said, extortion calls are meant to set people up. Um, Again, there are always more people involved, but definitely we see what these two do together. Venus Mars of Epstein trine Jupiter Pluto of Buffett, which is good for business, and it means compatibility on the values. Venus, okay, they have compatible values. They could have transformed their values together, but they have compatible values. Moon square Pluto, not is square by sign. Again, Moon Uranus conjunction, sudden upheaval, sudden emotional bursts. They could affect business, but all in all could transform. Mercury opposing Pluto, Chiron opposing Pluto. Okay, Jeffrey Epstein, Mercury, Chiron opposing the Pluto, Jupiter of Buffett, and this is where this powerful opposition regarding the message, the media, and indeed the subprime, but perhaps also the Epstein children could be in direct confrontation. So there would be something about Buffett that confronts the core wound that Epstein carries here. And those things is just juxtaposition. And now Saturn square Jupiter, Saturn square Pluto. Again, Saturn square Pluto, very challenging transformations. Saturn square Pluto, both could be feeling trapped within the connection. Both could be feeling in jail. Jeffrey Epstein got into an actual jail. And we have Pluto Uranus square, Jupiter Uranus square, rebelling against. No, this is Buffett. This is him rebelling against himself. Mercury Moon opposition, something about the communication could have sparked deep emotions. Mars Venus sextile. Mars is another point that is supposed to be remediating between the Ketu and Rahu of Buffett, but this is internally. Jupiter Chiron. Okay, Jupiter co-present with Chiron. A wound around beliefs, a wound around optimism, a wound around expansion in the sign of Venus. They could have desire to heal certain wounds that are intimate by their investment or their joint venture. Lilith co-present with Rahu, Lilith Rahu, okay? One of the charts, I'm not going to name names now, but when I had Lilith Rahu, had a Lilith Ketu, I think there was a Lilith Rahu in the mix. That was when I became informed of extortion cults. So again, Lilith Rahu here can be a wound around sexual sovereignty or something to do with sexual sovereignty. And here in the sign of Aquarius, it's definitely investments, big investments, okay? It's JP Morgan Chase type of stuff to do with that topic. Is the question, Lilith begs the question of sexual sovereignty in the world of mergings and acquisitions. Big conglomerates, private equities, and so on and so forth. And the answer she's receiving here is quite troublesome. And there's something that was fated. Okay, all of this circumvention around Spica means that there's something here that was fated to bubble pop. Saturn, Neptune, bubble pop around Spica, around trade, around justice. Okay, Epstein couldn't get away with that. Neither does Buffett in terms of the exposure, in terms of the discussion, in terms of the fact that Warren Buffett is known for knowing exactly to the detail what is it that he's investing in. Now that exposed a couple of stuff. Okay, taking it from the initial rage of disillusionment to actual logistic analysis of everything that I've been talking about regarding extortion cults. They're built on mind control. That would mean that both Epstein and Buffett would be tortured too. And that would mean that both of them will have handlers that would create urges in one another. For example, when I published the video about about exposing extortion cults and requesting the defense or the diplomatic immunity by cutting ties with extortion cults as escaping a cult, which would be escaping human trafficking. This would be the defense, by the way, of survivals of satanic abuse. Okay, satanic ritual abuse survivors are entitled to full diplomatic immunity by the merit that they escape human trafficking, even though they had to traffic. Okay, the minute they stop that and expose the cult, okay, and expose that as survivors, they no longer have ties to that because they're risking their lives and they're entitled to that immunity because the point of trafficking extortion cults was to create crimes against humanity. That's the extortion. And so I had to check if that urge to post it was coming from the extortion cults themselves, because they tend to create urges in people. Okay, this is why I look at astrology. I look at a chart. I'm a human being. I'm not immune to pressures and nervous systems and so on and so forth. But this is a part of what they do. And another part, because of the torture involved, there would be phenomena regarding consciousness that are not widely discussed scientifically. And one of the reasons is because that would expose the volatile mechanism around extortion cults, the entire way in which an extortion cult works. This is that Spica Saturn Neptune. The entire way in which an extortion cult works is to create a facade of, hey, it is that person that violated that person, and to leave outside all the mechanism. For example, when people wanted to say that the Me Too women were just climbing up the ladder using whatnot, okay, then they would use the gaps in their testimony, the places where they would get dissociation, their inability to have a coherent were because they weren't even having therapy. Okay, there was a threshold to the therapy. There is a threshold to the therapy when we have to heal in spite of the system. When you hear people like Annika Lucas speaking in cohesion and so on and so forth, that was after 2 decades of failed therapy and failed therapy and failed therapy and failed therapy, and pretty much healing in spite of therapy, even when therapy was found. Okay? Normally, it doesn't happen like that, and they would use that as to show that someone is lying and having an inconsistent testimony. Okay, this is why sex offenses changed the entire evidence-based juristic procedure. Larry Loudon, late Larry Loudon. Okay, that's where it jumped from philosophy of science to philosophy of law. So now, when we're talking about extortion calls, there are interesting phenomena that happen to the consciousness. That can be basically more than one consciousness occupying the body at the given time. Dissociation from the body, which would make the names list and identity list way more convoluted. That could literally be the handler, both the handler of the trafficked child being the person occupying Falcon or survivors, and it's triggering. Please stop listening. Okay, all the triggers apply to my videos. That could be the person who is the handler through the body of the child, having the sex and planting the urges with the adult person. Sometimes not. They would also program the children with extreme torture. Okay, because they would play on the certain needs going missing and meeting them through trauma bond. Uh, okay, but they would attach other type of consciousnesses that would take on a certain on an onset, and this is some of them become floaters. Okay, so if you listen to Dr. Miller's interview with Annika Lucas, that would be that this terminology would become more clear. By the way, in 2019, there was an almost kidnapping of me to see who my floaters are and so on and so forth, because and that came also from the desire to prevent healing or to control the healing process. Um, now here is another thing, and this is that when it comes to the perpetrator, okay, because a lot of them go through certain rituals where many consciousnesses occupy their body, that creates an entire, I know people have a lot of resistance to that, but as per the extortion code, they want to create a simple picture. All of them, all the people that we see in the big decision making places, and again, they take a 12 years old child that has been tortured for several years, had to be perpetrator, and literally doesn't have a way out. Like, and they decide to make it like the child has to show that they really want it. It's basically up to a chaotic system that doesn't always have a Pluto-Uranus conjunction, and whether the child crossed the threshold of becoming sadistic or didn't cross the threshold of becoming sadistic, which would govern the child's so-called choice. Okay, it's a chaotic system. It's a non-linear dynamic system, and at the statistics of the intervals, we would basically have a child that has crossed the threshold. Now, once the child crossed that threshold, they could get a stable result of sadism, which is what they were looking for. And even that would only be stable in as much as the derivative of the chaotic slope is basically within threshold. Okay, a cow's theory and the nervous system and the brain. For example, bipolar disorder in the eyes of Cow's theory and the brain is basically crossing threshold from manic to depressive. And it arrives when there is malnourishment and deprivation of the nervous system. What we call stable depression would be, okay, basically the complete exhaustion that has crossed the threshold of manic episodes, which would be the adrenaline bursts where people feel very high, very happy, very optimistic, but that are the attempts to basically come out of torture. Okay? This is why a lot of people at the onset of the subprime crisis would get certain medicines that are antidepressants and would begin to develop manic episodes, some of whom would have killed themselves just because they could suddenly do something about that. Now, again, the people who got some spiritual support of being actually loved and so on, and had access to that divine healing, amazing. That could be seen as a Neptune trine, a Neptune sextile. Um, okay, even if it's in a square. For example, I have my Neptune square right now, but it's in sextile and trying to other planets. Um, I know it's very challenging. Those type of informations are beyond challenging. But so was it challenging to people who thought that she's a whore that lies, that climbs up the ladder through the pants, and realized that she's tortured and that barely able to have cohesive anything because there are attempts to hack into the nervous system and control and prevent her from speaking. Now, it is that convoluted because by design it is said to be that convoluted. I cannot make it more simple to you, okay? Why the people in the Holocaust, sometimes they were like this, sometimes they were like that. Sometimes they could burn entire city, and sometimes they would give charity to everyone, not always because they were hiding something, but because of that non-linear dynamic system of our literal psyche. This Pluto Uranus Jupiter is doing is doing a job like Uranus Rahu. Uranus Rahu in Aries and the moon. Okay? Uranus square Pluto. Pluto Uranus really loves to control cows. The square to Pluto from Uranus makes it challenging to control cows. It can both be manifesting skill, but it can also be challenging. Okay, the volatility, particularly because with Pluto Uranus, people care to be in control over their cows, and sometimes they present an image of control over their cows because they need to explain themselves, both the cows and their psychological patterns, and the fact that there are patterns in their psychological cows, um, and also occultist cows or personality cult cows. A lot of people want to talk about responsibility and all those nice moral things. Note that when I talk about sexual sovereignty, I don't talk about it as a value. I talk about it as structurally something that to violate that creates a violation and dissociation in identity, which affects and inverts business and actions, passions and desire. Okay, and creates a volatility to addictive patterns, to compulsive patterns. Okay, I said no value here. It's not about morality. It's about behavior of a system. Okay, there's a reason people care about not to rape when they want to have an actual life. And it's not about value, it's about what's underneath that value, and underneath that value is a structure. Same with choice. It's beyond terrifying. Okay, it's the chaos of the psyche and the psyche of the chaos. Um, okay, more than I can say about this synastry. Both are crescent moons, growth paths, opportunity expansion, and indeed they became quite big in what they do. Um, and indeed with the Saturn Neptune that pertains particularly to Epstein here. Let me take a look at the composite again, or at the Davidson if we are doing an actual in-depth episode. The Davidson would give us Neptune Rahu, again 10 degrees away, but the co-present Neptune at the last decan of Virgo, which can have to do with destruction of cities, but also spreading disease, pandemics. Um, Moon Procyon, Saturn Lilith next to Beta Persei, Saturn Beta Persei, conjoining Lilith, conjoining Uranus, Saturn Uranus. Okay, this, when Saturn, Mars, and Uranus conjoined around Beta Persei in 1939 to 1941, we had the building of the concentration camps. And here is to do with sex trafficking death camps. That's basically a part of what they were building, sex trafficking death camps. Venus is where? Venus in Capricorn, Saturn sign, mountain areas. Mountain areas in fixed land. They could literally be, that Saturn is next to the sun of Israel. Um, Mars 11 degree. Wait, I don't want to spoil the game for Ali Khamenei. Leave some for Khamenei to expose. Okay, Jupiter Gemini. Mars in Aries 11 degrees. Suicide mission. Pluto Leo. Chiron Leo. Sol in Scorpio. Mercury at the end of Libra. That's mainly the Saturn Lilith Uranus that has this reception between Saturn and Venus. Um, that's basically sex trafficking cities, or sex trafficking death camps in mountain areas, or sex traffic or sex scrapers. This is also next to the moon of Netherlands. Uranus is on the moon of Netherlands 1800 chart. 9/11. On human trade, it is 9/11. Okay, because Saturn can be tall buildings, Venus, and what is traded here with Lilith is basically trafficking. It's basically trafficking using digital. Uranus is digital, so it's digital. Using digital technology, or it can be the they call it the robosexual. Midheaven 27 degrees Aries. Ascendant 9 degrees Leo. And if we go back to the composite, Falcon, this is where your classified project budget is. That's your 401ks. That's what it's funding. Okay, the composite shows me the subprime. The Davidson shows me the pandemic. All of them, both of them are related to sex trafficking. Again, no rape, no problems. No rape, no financial subprime crisis. They should have believed, when they said it was satanic panic, they allowed the subprime crisis. When they said the Me Too went too far, they allowed COVID and whatever the fuck is going on with the world right now. Where's the media conglomerates? Well, there's definitely a Gemini here in the composite. Okay, Uranus Gemini. We go back to the Davidson. Okay, Gemini is a big media. Yeah, Jupiter Gemini, but the Davidson shows me, yeah, Neptune Virgo can be, but I think it's more to do with the big trade, liquidations, merges, liquidations of mergers, bond mergers, private equity mergers. Okay, Mercury in Venus sign is to unify. It's a deal, it's a contract to unify, something to do about bonds, investments in sex trafficking cities. That was basically how they consolidated wealth. Good morning for the people that tell you tomorrow that you're not invested well, that you should listen to the people that actually understand to the detail what they're invested in. Now here is the thing. Classified projects, declassified is needed in the age of air to know where is the money funneled. Back to our chart, look at this 18 degrees midheaven, 29 degrees ascendant. Moon hour. Don't traffic people.